So ignore the different setting in the back. I am traveling and doing some stuff, but the news does not stop. So let's talk about Xbox yet again. I've made 4 videos prior talking about the price increase for Xbox Game Pass, all of the myriad missteps that they've made, the way they've responded, combined with new attempts like Xbox Cloud Gaming with ads, combined with recent learnings that certain features of Game Pass have been removed, like discounts for DLCs, and now the way rumors are spreading that Xbox might actually not even do next-gen consoles, though Microsoft has denied those rumors. But the fact that those rumors are so easy to believe highlights an environment where people really have very little faith in Xbox as a platform. So, what has gone on more recently? Interesting to note is that Xbox is slightly backpedaling on the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate price hike front. Not for everyone, not for regions like the US and the UK, but for certain countries like some in Europe and in Asia, Xbox Game Pass Ultimate price hikes were delayed. That doesn't mean that's going to be permanent, but at least for now, folks over in those regions can be safe with the current price point. So far we have heard from countries like Poland, Ireland, Italy, Germany, and South Korea, who have come out and said that they've got an email saying that essentially the new prices will not affect your current subscription because you're not in the market where that will be impacted. Again, such as the US and the UK and many other regions. Now, the big question right now is, why did this price hike even happen? Sarah Bond said not long ago that Xbox Game Pass is profitable. They brought in like $5 billion in revenue, and all signs indicated that they're doing well based on the words that they output. But, what recent developments indicate is that Xbox Game Pass is really not pleasing the overlords at Microsoft in terms of its revenue and profit potential, so they had to jack those prices. But beyond the fact that Game Pass subscriptions have plateaued, there's also all of the expenditures that Microsoft has been engaging in, like the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, which cost them $69 billion, combined with their Game Pass ventures ultimately leading to some areas of their business to suffer. And Call of Duty in particular is very relevant in this video and this whole situation because a big reason for why Microsoft bought Activision Blizzard was the revenue potential of Call of Duty. And they were hoping that by releasing Call of Duty on Game Pass on day one, it would cause a huge influx of subscribers, and that would offset the loss of sales and the fact that they're still selling that game in competing platforms like PlayStation, which is where the majority of Call of Duty gets sold. So, there were predictions back in October of 2024 that Call of Duty Black Ops 6 could boost Game Pass subscribers by 2.5 million to 4 million subscribers. So Microsoft was really riding on Call of Duty being the boost they need for Game Pass to look good in the books for, investors and for Microsoft executives. But the recent Game Pass price hikes ultimately indicate that they didn't garner enough new subscriptions, not enough to offset how much money they lost in terms of sales that were not made because people opted to go with the Game Pass route. So that led to a loss in the hundreds of millions. And this is something that Jason Schreier reported on here via news outlet Bloomberg in this article titled "Xbox's Hike on Game Pass Shows Cost of Lost Call of Duty Sales." This is information that Jason Schreier learned by interviewing 7 current and former Xbox employees, and they all ultimately did talk about how Game Pass did cut into the sales of higher margin games like Call of Duty, which is something that needs to recoup its money because of that $69 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard. The scale of the loss was relayed by one former employee who asked to remain anonymous, giving out the specific figure of more than $300 million in sales of Call of Duty that Xbox gave up on consoles and PCs last year because people instead opted to play Call of Duty on Xbox Game Pass. And it'd be one thing if there was enough of an influx of new subscribers to make up for the amount of money that they spent on Call of Duty, on buying the IP and on marketing this whole game and the Black Ops 6 and trying to make this a big release that generates a lot of revenue for them. But what ended up happening is that all the current Game Pass subscribers stayed with not purchasing the game and just playing Call of Duty on day one. The number of new subscribers just wasn't big enough, and a lot of the sales for Black Ops 6 ultimately happened on PlayStation. And I'm talking about a huge majority. Back in November of 2024, IGN reported that Call of Duty Black Ops 6 sold 82% of its total units on PlayStation 5. 82% of Black Ops 6's full dollar sales were on a competing platform, of which Microsoft and Xbox do get a cut off, but PlayStation also gets a significant cut of that as well. Now, there was a surge of subscriptions in gaming when Black Ops 6 launched, as IGN states right here. Circana also reports that non-mobile video game subscription spending industry-wide was up 16% year over year in October, and this was largely due to Black Ops 6 driving new Game Pass subscriptions. But if those new subscriptions would have been enough to offset some of the costs and some of the loss in sales, then Xbox would not have recently increased Game Pass Ultimate prices for monthly subscriptions by 50% here in the US and 100% in regions like Brazil, from $20 a month to $30 a month, $360 a year. At which point the value of Game Pass just isn't as compelling anymore, because with $360 a year, you can buy a significant number of AAA games, games on sale, and indie games that you get to keep and access without a subscription, that you get to, actually own instead of, rent through subscription. Here's analyst Joost van Drunen, founder of the video game analytics firm Aldora, who put it best in this quote that Jason Schreier got, stating, "Game Pass hasn't delivered the explosive growth Microsoft anticipated post-Activision, and they've realized their infrastructure costs don't align with their pricing model. The only way to really boost Game Pass substantially is to make Call of Duty exclusive to Xbox. But they sell so many copies on PlayStation that doing so would be financial suicide, but by not doing so, that also means that people don't have a reason to play on Xbox because PlayStation is just the dominant platform right now." And so while we did see an influx of new subscribers, a lot of people just opted to buy the game instead because they can actually own it and then play it for as long as possible without subscription costs and without having to be tied to subscription, which when it expires, you lose access to the game. Combined with the fact that Xbox as a platform is just seeming less compelling because it's just not able to compete with the likes of Nintendo and PlayStation, and now with Game Pass being 50 to 100% higher in price, it just makes the proposition of engaging with these kinds of games on Game Pass far less compelling. Because now that's only 2 to 3 months worth of Game Pass subscription. So it's the fact that first-party Xbox titles just haven't been able to drive the amount of surge and influx of new subscribers that Game Pass needs for this business model to actually be sustainable in a way that, the executives would be pleased with. Despite Sarah Bond touting that $5 billion revenue figure, despite her insisting that Game Pass is profitable and sustainable, that's not actually the case in the eyes of the executives and the investors and the people who really care about those financial books. And even prior to Jason Schreier's recent article, we have seen former Xbox employees speak out, including Pete Hines, after the ZeniMax and Bethesda merger happened. Pete Hines straight up said that gaming subscription services are worth jack shit without proper support for game developers. Sean Layden echoed this when he essentially reposted this article on LinkedIn and said, "I'm just going to leave this here. I believe Pete's colorful quote hits this nail right on the head. The question is not, is the service profitable for the platform, but rather, is it healthy and helpful for the developer? Is what we need to ask." Now, obviously, Sean Layden being from a competing platform, Sean Layden being the former head of PlayStation, maybe one could argue that his words don't mean as much, but we got former Xbox employees and executives, former high-level Xbox employees speaking out against the Xbox Game Pass model and the way it's not functioning quite as Microsoft would have liked. And you've also got Shannon Loftus here, who is also a longtime first-party Xbox developer, who said that, "I can attest that Pete is correct. While Game Pass can claim a few victories with games that otherwise would have sunk beneath the waves, Human Fall Flat, for example, the majority of game adoption on Game Pass comes at the expense of retail revenue, unless the game is engineered from the ground up for post-release monetization. I could, and may someday, write pages on the weird intertensions this creates." And with Call of Duty, that is actually exactly what is happening. Game Pass is essentially cannibalizing Call of Duty sales, and there is a lot riding on Call of Duty being this massive profit generator because of how much Xbox and Microsoft spent on purchasing Activision Blizzard, $69 billion. They have to recoup that somehow, and that comes in the form of cutting costs and also increasing prices where they can, like with Game Pass, where they want to charge more to existing loyal customers. But the price hike from $20 to $30 a month here in the US and double in other regions was so substantial that might have ended up hurting them more than it actually saved them, because the price hike was so substantial over such a short period of time that it's ultimately generated this huge amount of protest and revolt and backlash that significantly hurt the Xbox brand and the community's faith in the brand's ability to be able to be a genuine competitor in this really competitive landscape, especially when PlayStation and Nintendo are really thriving right now. And then there's the upcoming release of Black Ops 7, which currently isn't looking so hot due to the fact that Battlefield 6 is currently dominating the gaming space when it comes to upcoming first-person shooters. Right now, Battlefield 6 is the top best-selling game on Steam right now. It is being pre-ordered en masse. The beta was incredibly successful. You can see right here player numbers that peaked at 521,079 players, which is more than we've ever seen Call of Duty peak throughout its entire run on Steam. And then the real kicker is when you look at this top sellers list for Steam right now, Call of Duty Black Ops 7 is nowhere to be seen. You can see right here, and that's because Black Ops 7, I checked, is, as of the recording of this video, 87th place in terms of top selling games right now. And it's not that far away from launch. The fact that we're seeing Battlefield 6 at number 1 and Black Ops 7 at number 87 in top sellers for Steam, and then the fact that Battlefield 6 has been garnering immensely positive reception, whereas Black Ops 7, you go to YouTube and you look at all the trailers and stuff, and it's being mass disliked, and the community just isn't really about what Black Ops 7 is going for. It almost feels like Infinite Warfare versus Battlefield 1 all over again. And you've got a situation where Microsoft, now being the owners of Call of Duty, are in a pretty precarious position where Call of Duty Black Ops 7 isn't being the big system seller and the big Game Pass seller that they want it to be. And so the fact that Call of Duty as a franchise hasn't generated the kind of money that it needs to generate in terms of profit for it to start making the Activision Blizzard purchase, the $69 billion that they sunk into this, worth it, and the fact that Game Pass numbers are not increasing at a pace that they'd like, and Black Ops 7 likely not being something that will push that needle significantly, they're in this precarious situation where the only, choice that they had for the sake of investors and the executives and to make those people happy was to make Game Pass that much more expensive. But in doing so, they've just pissed off everyone, and that might have ultimately been a really severely detrimental move on their part, because a lot of people have unsubscribed. Cancel Xbox Game Pass was one of the most searched terms over the last week. And a lot of people are just not about Game Pass anymore. A lot of the most loyal Game Pass folks who have been saying that it is the best deal in gaming right now, and arguably you could have said that back then, but now with it being $30 a month, that just arguably is no longer the case. It's wild to see where Xbox is at right now, and I'll be very curious to see how ultimately all of this pans out, whether this price increase will allow them to kind of ride this wave and ultimately be able to come out on top of it, or if it will end up sinking them in the long term. But, I'll keep an eye out on things and report back. But for my part personally, my faith in Xbox is the lowest it's ever been, I think, in the platform's history. Not to say that Microsoft and Xbox will sink as a company. They're just too big to fail because Microsoft is Microsoft. What I am saying is Xbox as a hardware manufacturer, as a first-party developer and console maker, I think that's an area that's just kind of not something they can compete in anymore with the strategy that they're currently pushing for. And so I think the path ahead for Xbox really is going full Sega, essentially, going full third party and embracing that and hoping that, they're able to make really great games that will sell really well and keep their business alive. But I think Xbox as a competitor, against the likes of PlayStation and Nintendo, at least right now in the current state of things, it's just really not looking good. Prospects are really dire on that front. But, that's just me. That's one man's take. And this is kind of what you need to know about the latest in regards to Game Pass and how Call of Duty by itself might have been a significant impactor in the way Microsoft and Xbox have decided to move forward with their Game Pass subscription and their pricing models. And this is one man's take. I'd love to hear what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole situation in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.